So this one says, when do you know you're financially ready to buy a home? My husband and I have been talking about buying our first real home together, but we're not entirely sure if we're financially ready for it yet. We finished paying off our debt about a year ago and have been saving for a down payment since. But it feels like even with a down payment saved, we won't be ready for home ownership. We hear so many stories of people buying their first home before they're actually ready and end up in complete nightmares, not to mention all the things that could go wrong with the house itself. Besides our down payment, what else should we be considering to know that we're ready to buy our first home?
I think this is a great question, and it kind of hits home for me because this is kind of where my wife and I are at. You know, we got out of debt a few years ago. We've been saving up for the last, I don't know, probably like 3 years. We've both been like kind of saving, and then obviously when we got married, we started saving jointly. But yeah, I think if you get to your savings goal, right, like that's kind of like step one, but that's not the only thing that I think you need to factor in when it comes to being prepared to buy a home. And so I kind of just jotted down a list of things that I think are really important. Now, obviously, like this person said, like they got out of their credit card debt, or I assume it was credit card debt, high interest debt, right? They got their debts paid off. I think that in itself is going to be really great because it's going to lower how much you have to spend on just monthly expenses. But also when you go to qualify for a mortgage, right, they look at 40% of your income. They don't want more than 40% going towards repaying debt. And that includes a mortgage, but that's also going to include like car loans and credit cards. So getting out of that debt, you're probably going to qualify for more. And it's also just going to make the budget easier. Yeah. And then one thing in particular is having a 6-month emergency fund saved up. Home ownership, like, you know, like Lauren talked about, like there's going to be so many random expenses that come up that are going to be your responsibility. But then some other things that I don't think people consider enough is like, are you consistently contributing to retirement, right? Like, can you cover your retirement and make sure that you can still afford a home? You just got to have all your bases covered. And then a stable job, you know, like if you work in maybe like a freelance career and your income can vary, right? Like it's going to be harder to qualify. In some months, you may not have enough to cover your mortgage payment. Having a stable career, or if you and like your spouse, one of them is stable, one of them has freelance work, like I think that's a great position to be in. And then obviously, like this person said, the down payment saved up and then looking for something that you can actually afford. I think if you can kind of hit that checklist and kind of run through where am I at in all these areas, that's going to help you feel more prepared to buy a home. But what do you think, Lauren? You know, you've actually gone through the home buying process, right? Me and my wife are currently in it, but you have a little more experience on this than I do.
Yeah. So this is actually the question I asked myself, which started my entire debt-free journey. Many years ago, I was like looking at homes to buy, and I was still like paying off my student loans, my car. I wasn't actually making that much money. I had probably $5,000 in savings, and I was looking at houses to buy. And I remember feeling like very unsure about it. So I Googled this almost the same question, like, how do you know if you're ready? And it was basically like, you're not. So I took a step back and realized like, okay, how can I get more money? And it was to honestly pay off my debt. So I did that first, and then really started the process of saving up. So like they said, you know, they worked off paying off their debt. That is great, because if you go into a home ownership situation with debt, it's likely you're just going to continue to add more debt on, because, you know, outside of just saving up your down payment, there's so many other things that are involved with home ownership that can and probably will go wrong. So you're going to need to have money for that. And a lot of people don't, and then just continue to get into credit card debt. But, you know, I like that they're asking this question. Mm-hmm. And I feel like, so like you said, definitely you want to have, you know, your credit cards paid off, whatever that looks like. I don't think you have to be 100% debt free to buy a home, but I do think it helps, you know? Mm-hmm. But I think the biggest thing is, a lot of people, when they think, okay, I pay off my debt, now I have my down payment. The down payment is such a small part. I mean, it's a big part of the home buying process, but like, do you have your emergency fund on? I don't want this down payment to be the only thing you have, and then you have nothing left after that. Do you have your emergency fund saved up? Do you have an extra little pot of money? Well, first off, for your closing costs, and then also to do anything that you want to do with this house. Unless it is move-in ready, you want to touch nothing, you don't want to paint a wall, then maybe you don't need that. But I personally think as soon as you move into a house, you're going to either want some new, new furniture or something for it. You're going to want to paint a room, get a new appliance or something, have all of that there, because that's whenever, if you move in without those things, that's when it's going to start to become a nightmare. And that's usually what it is when people have to spend all this money and they just feel like they're just constantly like drowning in it. So yeah, I think that's a quick overview of what I think.
No, and I think you touched on a really important part. Like you said, like the down payment's really only one part of it, but like, there's closing costs. And for most homes, like that's going to be like 1 to 3% of the total purchase price. Right. So if you're buying a $300,000 house, you're looking at $9,000 in closing costs. And people don't consider that when they think of their down payment. But then the renovation costs, that's something me and my wife have saved up for, is renovating, because we know we want to find a place that needs a little love, and so that we can do that. And then moving costs. That was a big one for us. We were moving halfway across the country. And so we saved up $10,000, and we, spent a good chunk of that money just between like the pod and shipping her car and then actually driving here, right? Like it's a 2-day trip. And so we had to stay in a few hotels. Like, there's a lot of other costs associated with not only just getting your financial foundation in place, but then the down payment's really only one part of that picture. There's other costs that I think people don't consider, especially like that first question we asked, like, is renting better than buying, or vice versa? Like, it's not just the down payment. It's not just what you're paying on a monthly basis. It's all the other costs associated with it.
Yeah, definitely. But I love that they're asking this question. I think a lot of people don't ask this question,
Yeah.
They just go into it because we're told since we're very little that to be successful, you have to get a good job, get married and buy a house, so that's just a normal step of life. And a lot of people don't run the numbers or ask these type of questions. So I think they're on the right track here. But yeah, just thinking about those few extra things as you get into homeownership will definitely start you on the right path.
Yeah, absolutely. And asking those questions too, like, am I ready? Can I run the numbers? Can I actually afford this? Like, it's not just with home ownership. Like, it should be with pretty much every big decision. I would say any decision that's more than like $500, right? Like, can I actually afford this? Especially if you're going to take on a monthly payment for it.
The information, opinions, and recommendations provided on this podcast are for entertainment purposes only and do not constitute professional financial advice. Any financial decisions you make based on the content of this podcast are your responsibility. We strongly recommend consulting with a licensed financial advisor or other qualified professional before making any significant financial decisions. By listening to this podcast, you acknowledge that we are not liable for any financial outcomes.